Little did she know, I agreed instantly, then turned around and went to the police station for a nap. In my last life, my sister used her normally plagiarized grades to build up the image of a straight-A student. To avoid her scheme being exposed when she couldn't cheat on the SATs, she forgot her ID at home on purpose and sent me to retrieve it. By the time I rushed back with her ID, the exam had already been going for 20 minutes, and she was already crying to our parents. Chloe did it on purpose so I wouldn't get into Harvard or MIT. She hid my ID so I couldn't get in, and now I'm going to get a 0 on the first section. I couldn't defend myself. Even my homeroom teacher, a man known for his integrity and fairness, refused to believe me and pointed his finger at me. You've always been jealous of your sister, picking on her at school. But how could you hide her ID at a time like this? The entire school was counting on you to be the top scorer and make us all proud. My parents, who had always favored my sister, pushed me into traffic, and I was hit by a car and killed. I died in despair, under the hateful glares of everyone around me. Time rewound. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day of the SATs. Chloe, I left my ID at home. You have to go back and get it for me. Mom and Dad are counting on me to get into Harvard or MIT. Sarah grabbed my arm, her face a mask of anxiety, and a cold sweat instantly broke out on my back. In my last life, my parents fell for the words of some phony psychic when they got married. A lucky star will be born into your family. When I was born, it was completely uneventful. But the moment my sister was born, my father got a call from his boss saying that a stalled work project had just been approved. From that day on, my parents believed my sister was their lucky star. They always called her their little treasure, their good luck charm, and said that as the older sister, I had to give her everything. They grew to resent me more and more. I often went hungry and had to endure my father's drunken beatings. You useless thing. Not like your sister, she's a lucky star. The moment she was born, my project got green-lit. In elementary school, Sarah was always the academic superstar, the kid every parent compares you to. But in middle school, her grades started to slide. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't get back to her glory days. So she started looking for shortcuts. She cheated on her exams, and once she got a taste of success, she stopped trying altogether. She maintained her straight-A student halo not through hard work, but through plagiarism. Chloe, did you hear me? Sarah's shove snapped me back to reality. I looked at her face, which was etched with anxiety but held a flicker of calculation in her eyes, and my stomach churned. The agonizing pain and coldness of being crushed by the wheels of a car in my past life seemed to flash before my eyes, nearly suffocating me. But this time, I took a deep breath, suppressed the roiling emotions, and quickly put on an expression of worry even more convincing than hers. Oh my God, Sarah! How could you be so careless? The SATs are a huge deal. I grabbed her arm, my grip so tight it made her wince. Don't worry, I'll run back and get it for you right now. I'll be as fast as I can. You just wait outside the testing center, and don't stress out. It'll affect your performance. I spoke quickly and sincerely, as if her exam was more important than my own life. Sarah clearly hadn't expected this reaction. She froze for a second, then managed to squeeze out a couple of tears. Chloe, you have to hurry. I can't get in without my ID. I know. Leave it to me. I patted my chest emphatically, then turned and sprinted toward home. I ran as if my life depended on it, my retreating figure radiating a sense of do-or-die determination. Watching my anxious back, Sarah couldn't stop a triumphant smirk from gracing her lips. Then she leisurely strolled toward the entrance of the testing center. Of course, she wasn't going to just stand there and wait. She had to set the stage for the big show when I arrived late. However, the moment I rounded the first corner and was out of her sight, I screeched to a halt. The panic on my face vanished, replaced by an icy calm and a hint of mockery. Go home and get her ID? After being reborn, did she really think I was still that stupid? I felt my pocket for my own admission ticket and ID. They were right where they should be. In my last life, I never even made it into my own testing room. This time, maybe they'd have another use. But right now, I had something more important to do. I scanned my surroundings, my gaze quickly locking onto a specific building, not far away, the place with the official seal. A symbol of justice and safety. The police station. That's it. Without a moment's hesitation, I changed direction and walked steadily toward the precinct. This time, I wouldn't be the pathetic, defenseless victim. I was going to get myself the most solid, irrefutable alibi, and a witness who could tear Sarah's charade to shreds. As I walked into the bright lobby of the police station, the officer on duty looked up at me. "Can I help you, miss? It's SAT's day, isn't it? Are you in some kind of trouble?" His tone was kind. I immediately put on an expression of extreme nervousness, trying hard to seem composed. I spoke a little too fast. "Officer, hi. I think I'm too nervous. My heart is pounding, I feel dizzy, and I can't really catch my breath. My house is too far to go back to. Can I just sit on one of the benches in the lobby for a little while and calm down? I'll leave after the exam starts, maybe in half an hour, once I feel better. This place just makes me feel really safe." I made sure to project the vulnerability and anxiety of a student about to take a major exam. The request was perfectly reasonable. Society tends to offer the utmost convenience and care to students on exam day. Just as I expected, the officer didn't suspect a thing. Instead, he said with concern, "Oh, you must be really nervous. Sit down, sit down. Davis, get this young lady a glass of warm water. Don't you worry, miss. Just rest here, relax. You've still got time." "Thank you. Thank you so much." I thanked him profusely and sat down obediently on a bench in the lobby, taking the glass of warm water another officer handed me. I sipped the water slowly, my gaze calmly sweeping over the clock on the wall. Time ticked by, 1 second at a time. Over at the testing center, Sarah had probably realized by now that she couldn't get in, and was starting her performance for our parents and teacher. I could almost picture it. Her crying her eyes out, accusing me of maliciously hiding her ID, of deliberately wasting time to destroy her dream of getting into Harvard or MIT. I could imagine our parents' fury and our teacher's disappointed shake of the head. But this time, I, Chloe Miller, was sitting quietly in the lobby of a police station several miles from the testing center, resting under the watchful eyes of several police officers. This was my impenetrable fortress and my most powerful counterattack. 15 minutes after the exam started, I even leaned back on the bench and closed my eyes to rest. Because I knew a storm was coming. And I was fully prepared, just waiting for them to walk right into my trap. Sure enough, about 20 minutes after the exam began, a flurry of hurried, chaotic footsteps echoed from outside the station, mixed with a woman's shrill wails and a man's furious roars. "Officer! Officer! You have to get justice for my daughter. That damn girl. She's pure evil. She ruined my Sarah's future." I slowly opened my eyes, a cold smile touching my lips. They're here. It's showtime. And I'm already in the best seat in the house. The doors to the police station lobby were thrown open, and my stellar parents stormed in, my father, George, red-faced with veins bulging on his neck, and my mother, Laura, wailing as if the world was ending. Right behind them was my dear sister Sarah, crying pitifully, her eyes red and swollen, her shoulders shuddering, the very picture of a girl who had been grievously wronged. And behind them, unbelievably, was our fair and just homeroom teacher, Mr. Peterson. His brow was furrowed, his face an open display of disappointment and anger. The whole cast had arrived for this little drama. "Officer! Quick! Arrest that evil woman!" George roared, pointing ahead without even seeing who was in the lobby, his spit nearly flying onto the officer behind the front desk. Laura slapped her thigh and cried, "My daughter's SATs are ruined, because of her. She was jealous of her sister's good grades, so she deliberately hid her ID to keep her out of the exam. She should be struck by lightning." The officer was taken aback by the commotion, but quickly put on his professional face. "Calm down, folks. This is a police station. Tell me what happened, one at a time. Arrest who? Who ruined the SATs?" Sarah sobbed, lifting her tear-streaked face to add her own embellishments, but her eyes suddenly froze on me, sitting quietly on the bench, still holding a half-full glass of warm water. Her crying stopped abruptly. Her eyes went wide as if she'd seen a ghost. The carefully constructed mask of grief cracked, revealing nothing but pure shock and disbelief. How could she be here? Wasn't she supposed to be running back to the testing center, sweaty and out of breath. How could she be sitting so calmly in a police station? You, Sarah pointed at me, her lips trembling, unable to form a single word. Laura and George followed her gaze and were equally stunned. Chloe. George's roar got stuck in his throat, turning into a strange, incredulous squawk. Laura's wailing choked off, her mouth hanging open in a comical expression. Mr. Peterson was just as shocked, looking from me to Sarah, his brow furrowing even tighter. Chloe? Sarah finally found her voice, which trembled violently with a panic she couldn't hide. What are you doing here? Weren't you getting my ID? Her mind was clearly in a state of chaos, and the question she blurted out exposed her entire script. I was supposed to be running around, not sitting here relaxing. I put down my water glass, slowly stood up, and wore an expression of perfect confusion and innocence, even adding a hint of surprise at seeing my family. Sarah? Mom? Dad? Mr. Peterson? What are you all doing here? I looked at the police officer, my tone sincere and a bit apologetic. Officer, this is my family and my teacher. They must be looking for me. Then I turned back to Sarah, my expression completely natural. Sarah, that's a strange question. Weren't you the one who told me not to rush? To find a place to rest and calm down? I started running and my heart was pounding. I felt dizzy, and I was worried I'd mess up the afternoon exam. I saw the police station and felt safe, so I came in to sit for a bit. What's wrong? Did something happen? Why aren't you taking the test? And why are you crying like this? My series of questions were filled with a sister's concern. Sarah was completely blindsided by my barrage of matter-of-fact questions. Her brain shut down. She stammered, her face turning beet red. Laura was the first to recover. Although the situation was unexpected, her protective instincts kicked in. She shrieked, "Rest? Who told you to rest?" Sarah told you to go home and get her ID. Did you get it? Sarah couldn't get into the exam because she didn't have her ID. She missed the English section. It's all your fault. George also came to his senses. Though something felt off, his anger took over again. That's right. You damn jinx. Did you do this on purpose? Where's the ID? Mr. Peterson looked at my weak and resting state, then at the aggressive parents and the tongue-tied Sarah. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, but he still spoke sternly. Chloe, what exactly is going on? Sarah said you promised to go back and get her ID but then never returned, causing her to miss the entry deadline. This is about her future. You need to explain yourself. All eyes were on me. I took a deep breath and put on an even more confused, almost hurt expression. Get her ID? Sarah, when did I say I'd get your ID? The room fell silent. Sarah's face turned deathly pale. What are you talking about? She shrieked, her voice sharp with desperation. Right at the entrance to the testing center. You promised me. Mom, Dad, and Mr. Peterson all saw you. She tried to call on her witnesses. Laura and George immediately chimed in. That's right. We all heard you. I frowned slightly, pretending to think hard, then had a sudden epiphany. Oh, Sarah, you mean that? I looked at the officer and Mr. Peterson, my tone open and a little embarrassed. Officer, Mr. Peterson, you've misunderstood. Sarah did tell me she thought she forgot her ID, and she was really panicking. So I tried to calm her down. I said, don't worry, I've got this. But I was just trying to soothe her nerves. Students taking the SATs get frazzled easily, so I had to get her to calm down first. I turned to Sarah, my tone even taking on a slightly scolding, concerned quality. Sarah, were you too nervous to hear me correctly? Or maybe you misunderstood. What I meant was don't worry, calm down. Maybe the ID is in a pocket in your backpack. Or you should check your pockets again. And if not, you could have immediately asked one of the police officers on duty outside the testing center for help. They can issue a temporary ID. I remember our teachers telling us repeatedly what to do in that kind of emergency. I spread my hands, my expression utterly sincere, with a hint of how can you be so dense? Exasperation. Why would I actually run home to get it? It's over an hour-long bus ride to our house and back. Even if I could fly, I wouldn't have made it back before the exam started. I know that much. I was obviously telling you to get help from an officer. I myself came to the police station to rest because I was feeling nervous and unwell. I figured with officers around, this would be the safest place to be. My explanation was reasonable, logical, and cleverly emphasized police station, and asking the police for help over and over, positioning myself as the sensible, knowledgeable older sister who was only trying to help and was now being misunderstood. Sarah was completely stunned. She pointed at me, trembling. "You're lying. That's not what you said. You promised me. You're a liar." She was in a total panic, capable of nothing but repeating weak accusations. Laura and George were speechless. As biased as they were, even they could see the logic in my words. The timing just didn't work. And here I was, right in a police station, talking about how much I trusted the police. This image was completely different from the evil sister, who hid the ID they had imagined. Mr. Peterson's face had completely darkened. He was now looking at Sarah with scrutiny and suspicion. He was a man who valued grades, but he valued character even more. In the scene playing out before him, it was becoming clear who was more believable. The officer on duty had been listening the whole time. He finally spoke up sternly, first looking at Sarah. "This young lady is right. In a situation like this, the first thing you should have done was seek assistance from us. We could have issued a temporary ID in plenty of time. Why didn't you think of that?" He then turned to me, his expression softening. "Your decision to come here and rest instead of taking the test yourself was a calm and correct way to handle feeling unwell." The officer's words were like a heavy slap across the faces of Sarah and my parents. I timed it perfectly, lowering my head and muttering just loud enough for everyone to hear, my voice full of hurt and lingering fear. I was just worried Sarah was too stressed, so I tried to calm her down. I didn't think she'd misunderstand and cause all this trouble here, bothering you officers. What if I had tried to push through and take the test, and then fainted in the exam room? That sentence nailed Sarah to the wall, branding her as selfish, unreasonable, and a waste of police resources, all while ignoring her sister's health. Sarah looked at me, and for the first time, her eyes showed true fear. She finally understood. This time, her carefully laid trap hadn't caught its prey. Instead, it had left her completely exposed for everyone to see. The script had been completely flipped. A strange silence fell over the police station lobby. The only sounds were Sarah's ragged, indignant breathing and the awkward, shifting expressions on my parents' faces. The police officer's gaze was now clearly disapproving, and Mr. Peterson's face was grim. His look toward Sarah was no longer one of disappointment, but of sharp scrutiny. "No, it's not like that." Sarah was still making a last-ditch effort. She grabbed Mr. Peterson's arm, tears welling up again, this time laced with real panic. "Mr. Peterson, you have to believe me. She really did promise to go get it. She did it on purpose. She's jealous of me." "Sarah." Mr. Peterson yanked his arm away, his voice harsh and colder than I'd ever heard it. "You're still spouting nonsense." He pointed at the clock on the wall, his tone accusatory. "Look at the time. How long has it been since the exam started? Even if Chloe had promised you, how could she have flown back? You tell me." He then pointed at me. I timed it perfectly, showing a mix of wronged sadness and physical weakness, leaning back slightly against the chair. My face was pale, partly from acting and partly from the lingering spiritual shock of my rebirth. "And look at your sister. She wasn't feeling well, and she knew to come to the police station for help and rest. That's the most responsible thing she could have done. She was even thinking about you, worried about stressing you out before your exam. And you?" Mr. Peterson was getting angrier, his chest heaving. "You couldn't find your ID, and instead of asking the police for help like your sister suggested, you stubbornly assumed she would bring it to you? And when she didn't, it's all her fault. You even incited your parents to come raise hell at a police station. Sarah, what on earth is going on in that head of yours?" Mr. Peterson's roar was like thunder, making Sarah flinch. Her face went white as a sheet, and she couldn't utter another word. Her biggest shield, the trust of her homeroom teacher, had just crumbled to dust. My parents' faces burned. As ignorant and biased as they were, even they were speechless in the face of the clear logic laid out by the police and the teacher. My father opened his mouth, about to yell at me out of habit, but a cold glare from the officer shut him up. You too, the officer said sternly, addressing my parents directly. The situation is perfectly clear. Your younger daughter was careless, forgot an important document, handled the emergency terribly, and then tried to frame her sister. And you, as parents, came storming into a police station without knowing any of the facts, disrupting our work and showing a complete lack of basic concern and trust for your older daughter, who worked just as hard for this exam. What kind of parents are you? The officer's words were blunt, like a whip lashing across George and Laura's faces. Laura stammered, We were just so worried. Being worried is no excuse for making a scene. The officer snapped. Look at your older daughter. She's also a high school senior, and she managed to stay calm and sensible even when she wasn't feeling well. And you too? You came in here yelling and screaming, wanting to have someone arrested? What is wrong with you? A vein throbbed on George's forehead, but he couldn't come up with a single retort. He could only glare at the terrified Sarah. I'm sorry, officer. We've caused you trouble. Mr. Peterson took a deep breath and apologized first. Then he turned to me, his expression a complex mix of guilt and a touch of fear. Chloe, I was wrong to accuse you. I'm sorry. How are you feeling? Can you still make it to the exam? He glanced at the clock. The English section had been running for over 40 minutes. According to the rules, anyone more than 30 minutes late was not allowed in. I shook my head weakly, forcing a brave yet regretful smile. It's okay, Mr. Peterson. I understand you were just worried about Sarah. I'm still a little dizzy. Even if I rushed over now, I wouldn't be allowed in. It's fine. I still have the afternoon exam. I'll just rest up and prepare for that. The more understanding and wronged I appeared, the more it highlighted the absurdity and cruelty of Sarah and her parents. Hearing my words, Mr. Peterson's guilt deepened. He opened his mouth, but all that came out was a heavy sigh. A student's English SAT score, ruined, just like that. While it wasn't his direct fault, the fact that it had happened to one of his students in such a ridiculous way shook him to the core. The officer's expression softened as well. He said to me gently, Just rest up, miss. Don't let this add to your stress. Do well this afternoon. He then shot a cold glance at the other three. You all, aren't you going to apologize to this young lady? Then take her home so she can rest for her afternoon exam. George and Laura looked mortified. Apologizing to me was worse than death for them. But under the pressure of the officers' and teachers' stares, George managed to squeeze out a few words through his teeth. Chloe, Dad was just too worried. Laura unwillingly muttered something as well. Your mom was just worried about Sarah. As for Sarah, she bit her lip, staring at the floor, her entire body rigid with defiance. I didn't need a sincere apology from them. That would be asking too much. What I wanted was this exact outcome. The truth revealed, the tables turned, their hypocritical favoritism stripped bare in public. I shook my head magnanimously, my voice soft. It's okay, Mom, Dad. I know you were worried about my sister. Sarah didn't mean it either. She was just too nervous. I once again pinned the blame on Sarah's nerves and unintentional mistake, fanning the flames under her. Just as I expected, Mr. Peterson and the officer looked at Sarah with even greater disapproval. All right, now that things are clear, all of you can go. Don't disturb the public any further, the officer said, dismissing them. Mr. Peterson rubbed his temples wearily. He said to my parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, please take the girls home. Sarah, sigh, as for the afternoon exam, try to adjust your mindset. His tone no longer held any of the hope he once had for a future Ivy Leaguer. Sarah's head shot up, all the color draining from her face. She knew she hadn't just lost her English score. She had lost all of her teacher's trust and expectations, and the carefully crafted illusion she had maintained for years. The farce was finally over. We walked out of the police station in an extremely tense and awkward atmosphere. The sun was blinding, but my mind felt clearer than ever. The car wheels of my past life hadn't crushed my future. Instead, they had dragged all the ugliness out into the light. Looking at the devastated Sarah walking ahead, and at my parents, their faces grim, occasionally shooting her disgusted looks, I knew that this family, from this day forward, would never be the same. And my SATs, my future, had only just begun. I touched the admission ticket in my pocket. I would be on time for the math exam this afternoon. This time, I would write the story of my own life. The sunlight outside the police station was blindingly white, a stark contrast to the angry, wailing chaos of our arrival. The ride home was shrouded in a deathly silence. Sarah looked like her soul had been sucked out. She kept her head down, tears falling silently, but this time, no one offered any comfort. George's face was grim. He stomped ahead, and the occasional glance he threw at Sarah was no longer filled with doting love, but with unconcealed irritation and disgust. Laura trailed beside them, wanting to say something but silenced by her husband's expression and the sight of her broken younger daughter. She finally let out a heavy sigh and shot Sarah a glare of her own. They might still be biased, but they were, above all, practical. The difference between a lucky star who could get into Harvard and bring honor to the family, and a jinx who caused a massive scene on exam day, and might not even get into college, was a simple calculation for them. The halo around Sarah's lucky star status now had a massive, irreparable crack. Mr. Peterson followed us at a distance, his face still dark as he seemed to be processing the unbelievable events. He didn't say another word to my parents. At the intersection, he hurried forward and called me aside. "Chloe," he said, his tone heavy with an apology he couldn't fully voice. "This afternoon's exam, don't let this affect you. Focus and do your best." He paused, then added, "If you need anything, you can always call me." I nodded, offering a weak but understanding smile. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I will." Mr. Peterson glanced at the dejected Miller family, shook his head and walked away. I knew that after this, his opinion of Sarah had been irrevocably changed, and toward me he now had at least a sense of fairness and basic concern. The atmosphere in our suffocating home was even colder. Bang! George slammed the keys on the table, making Laura and Sarah jump. "Cry, cry, cry. That's all you know how to do," he roared, whirling on Sarah. "You've completely humiliated me today. Getting yelled at by the police. Yelled at by your teacher. All because of you, you useless thing. You can forget your own ID? And when you do, you don't think to find a cop. What's in that head of yours, crap?" Sarah shrank under his verbal assault, her sobs growing louder. "Dad, I didn't mean to, it was Chloe, she..." "Don't you dare mention your sister." George exploded like a firecracker, grabbing the nearest thing and swinging it at her. "If you hadn't lied about her, would we have been so humiliated? Harvard? I doubt you'll even pass. You jinx." The blows rained down on Sarah as she screamed and tried to dodge. Laura reflexively tried to intervene, but was shoved aside by George. "Get out of the way. This is all your fault for spoiling her." I watched the drama unfold with cold detachment, feeling no emotion, perhaps even a flicker of amusement. Look at them. This is their precious lucky star. The moment she loses her value, she instantly becomes a jinx. I didn't say a word to stop them, nor did I retreat to my room out of habit. I just calmly walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and then took out my math formula book. I sat down on an old chair in the corner of the living room and started to read. My calm focus was a bizarre contrast to the chaos unfolding before me. When George got tired, he threw down his weapon, panting. He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. "You'd better pull yourself together for this afternoon's exam. If you mess up again, I'll break your legs." He then stormed into his bedroom and slammed the door. Laura looked at her crying daughter, then at me, quietly reading. Her lips moved, but she said nothing, instead taking out her frustration by loudly and irritably cleaning the house. Sarah was slumped on the floor, her hair a mess, red welts already forming on her skin. She looked up, and the gaze she fixed on me was no longer one of feigned innocence, but of venomous hatred and disbelief. She couldn't understand why everything had turned out this way. She was supposed to be the one everyone was comforting, while I was the one being condemned. I met her gaze, calmly closed my textbook and stood up. It was almost time. I had to get to the testing center. I went back to my tiny room and grabbed my pencil case and admission ticket. As I passed through the living room, Laura finally spoke, her tone laced with displaced anger. "You two. Why couldn't you have just asked a few more questions? Did you have to let it get to this point?" I stopped and looked at her. There was no anger in my eyes, only a quiet calm that made her strangely uneasy. "Mom, I was dizzy. I needed to rest." And I did tell her to find a police officer. It was her choice not to listen and to misunderstand me, wasn't it? Laura was speechless. I ignored her and walked to the door. From behind me, I heard Sarah's suppressed, hate-filled growl. Chloe Miller. Just you wait. I didn't break my stride, but a cold smile played on my lips. Wait. Of course I'll wait. I'll wait to see how you, the fake lucky star, completely burn out and fall from the sky. The afternoon sun was perfect. I took a deep breath of free air and strode toward my battlefield. This time, no one and nothing could stop me. The atmosphere in the afternoon math exam was solemn and tense. I found my seat and placed my admission ticket and ID neatly on the corner of the desk. Sunlight streamed through the window, landing on the clean answer sheet with a soft glow. My heart was steady, my breathing even, a world away from the panicked despair of my past life. The bell rang, and the proctors began distributing the test booklets and answer sheets. I took the test and gave it a quick scan. Good, everything was as expected. Having lived this life once before. The formulas and theorems that once seemed so difficult were now etched clearly in my mind. More importantly, my mind was quiet, no longer dragged down by the swamp of my family, or terrified by baseless accusations. The tip of my pen whispered across the paper, a prelude to my new life. I was completely focused, immersed in the logical world of problem solving. I forgot the time, the drama that might still be unfolding outside, and even, for a moment, the hatred. In that moment, it was just me and my exam. Every multiple choice question, every fill in the blank, I answered with cautious speed. For the long-form problems, my thoughts flowed smoothly, my steps clear. I had never felt like this before, as if my brain had been completely scrubbed clean, leaving it sharp and efficient. Time ticked by, and I finished everything with 15 minutes to spare. I checked my work twice, confirmed there were no careless mistakes, and then put down my pen with a quiet sigh of relief. I looked up and around the room. Other students were still scribbling furiously, their brows furrowed. But I felt a sense of calm, even a confident joy. When the final bell rang, I joined the stream of students leaving the testing center. The sun was still bright, warming my skin. As I walked out of the main gate, I immediately spotted the three of them waiting. The atmosphere was even stranger than it had been at noon. Sarah's eyes were swollen like walnuts. She stood off to the side, pale and trembling slightly. It was clear her afternoon exam had been a disaster. George stood with his hands on his hips, his face as dark as the bottom of a pot, refusing to even look at Sarah. Laura just looked anxious, wanting to say something but not daring to. When they saw me, all three of their gazes snapped toward me. George spoke first, his voice stiff and unnaturally hesitant. How'd it go? He was asking me, but his eyes darted around, as if the question itself felt awkward coming out of his mouth. Laura immediately looked at me too, her expression a mix of conflicting emotions, residual anger, a faint glimmer of hope she probably didn't even recognize, and mostly confusion. I answered calmly it was fine. I finished all the problems. Both George and Laura were stunned, as if they hadn't expected such a confident answer. In their minds, I had always been the quiet, unremarkable older daughter with average grades. Sarah's head shot up. Her bloodshot eyes stared daggers at me, overflowing with jealousy and resentment. She screeched, "Of course you finished. You didn't have to lose an entire section's worth of points this morning like some people. What are you so proud of?" Her shrill voice drew looks from a few other students and parents nearby. "Shut your mouth." George whipped his head around and hissed, a vein popping on his forehead. "Haven't you embarrassed us enough?" Laura quickly pulled at Sarah's arm. "Sarah, that's enough." I looked at Sarah's unhinged state with no emotion, feeling only a sense of pity. She still didn't understand that the person who had ruined her was never me, but her own vanity, her schemes, and our parents' blind indulgence. I ignored her shouting and just said to George and Laura, "Dad, Mom, I'm going home. I'm a little tired." This time, they didn't ignore me or demand that I wait for Sarah as they always had. George even grunted a vague aha, and Laura nodded instinctively. As I turned and walked away, I could feel 3 pairs of eyes fixed on my back, one angry and resentful, 2 confused and bewildered. I knew that from this day forward, My status in this family was undergoing a subtle but irreversible change. Not because I had suddenly gained power, but because the pillar of their favoritism, the belief that Sarah is a lucky star, had crumbled, revealing the ugly ruins beneath. For the first time, the walk home didn't feel so long and oppressive. That evening, the atmosphere at the dinner table was ice cold. The food was simple, even a little cold. Clearly, Laura hadn't been in the mood to cook. George drank sullenly, one glass after another. Laura picked at her food, occasionally glancing at Sarah, who was silently pushing rice around her bowl as tears dropped into it. And then peeking at me, who was eating quietly. "What are you crying for? Eat." George finally couldn't stand the oppressive silence, and slammed his glass down. "You did horribly on the exam, and you still have the nerve to cry." Sarah flinched, her sobs catching in her throat, replaced by stifled whimpers. "George, stop it." "Sarah is," Laura started to defend her out of habit. "She's what?" George cut her off, his breath reeking of alcohol. "She's made me a laughingstock. I was counting on her to bring honor to the family? Ha. I see now she's just a damn jinx. If I had known it would be like this, back then." He didn't finish his sentence, but the disgust and contempt were unmistakable. Sarah's face went chalk white. She looked at her father in disbelief, as if she had just heard the most horrifying words in the world. I quietly finished the last bite of rice in my bowl, put down my chopsticks and said calmly, "Dad, Mom, I'm done. I'm going to go study. I have another exam tomorrow." With that, I got up from the table without giving any of them a second glance. Behind me, I could hear George's increasingly irritated cursing, Laura's feeble attempts to calm him, and Sarah's completely broken, desperate sobs. Back in my room, I closed the door, shutting out most of the noise. I sat at my desk and pulled out my study materials for the science section, but I didn't start reading right away. I knew the opening act of this war had just ended. Sarah wouldn't give up, and my parents' attitudes were still wavering. But I wasn't afraid, because from the moment I opened my eyes in that police station lobby, I had taken back control of my life. Tomorrow's exam, and the one after that, I would continue to take them with a steady hand. With my pen, I would write the first solid chapter of my reborn future. The exams on the second and third days were uneventful. I arrived at the testing center early, my mind calm, and focused on answering the questions. In every subject, I performed at my best, even exceeding my own expectations. The knowledge felt branded into my reborn mind, crystal clear. When I turned in each test, I felt a sense of fulfillment and peace. The scene of the Miller family happily waiting for their lucky star outside the testing center was gone. On the second day, George came alone. His face was still dark, and when he saw me he just asked gruffly, "Finished?" When I nodded, he said nothing more, his eyes even seeming to avoid mine. Sarah and Laura didn't show up. On the third day, only Laura came. Her eyes were red and swollen, a clear sign of the crying and arguing that had been going on at home. When she saw me, she opened her mouth as if to ask how it went, but in the end, she just handed me a bottle of water and said dryly, "Come home when you're done." Her voice was numb with exhaustion. George and Sarah were nowhere to be seen. I knew the storm of low pressure at home was probably even more intense than I had imagined. The collapse of Sarah's lucky star persona had shattered the very foundation of this family's twisted equilibrium. My parents' disappointment, anger, and mutual blame were more than enough to turn that house into a war zone. And I was the calm eye of that storm. When the final bell rang for the last exam, I walked out with the surging crowd. The air was thick with a mix of relief, elation, confusion, and uncertainty. Students were screaming, tearing up their review materials and throwing them into the air, or hugging their parents and crying. I walked calmly through the chaos, my own heart thrumming with a quiet, powerful emotion, the certainty of someone who had broken free from her chains and was about to start a new life. "Chloe," a voice called out. I turned. It was my homeroom teacher, Mr. Peterson. He looked a bit tired, but his eyes were much clearer than they had been on the first day of the exams. "Mr. Peterson, how did it go?" he asked, walking over, his tone kind and genuinely concerned. "I think it went okay," I answered conservatively. Mr. Peterson nodded and sighed. "About what happened the other day, I want to apologize to you again. I was too quick to judge, and I didn't investigate properly before. He paused, then changed the subject, his tone becoming more serious. Go home, estimate your score, and get ready to choose your colleges. With your abilities, as long as you perform normally, you'll definitely clear the bar for a top-tier university. You might even have a shot at some of the best ones. Don't let things at home affect your choices. His words seemed to hint that he was worried my parents might cause more trouble, especially with college applications. A warmth spread through my chest. I nodded. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. I won't. Good. If you have any problems, call me anytime, he said, offering a few more words of encouragement before turning to greet other students. I watched him walk away, knowing that there was, after all, some justice and concern left in the world. When I got home, it was, as expected, an icebox. Sarah's door was shut tight, with no sound coming from within. George wasn't home, probably out drinking again. Laura was mechanically trimming vegetables in the kitchen, her eyes vacant. When she saw me, she just lifted her gaze and asked listlessly, "Finished?" "Yeah." I put down my pencil case and headed for my room. "Chloe," Laura suddenly called out, her voice hesitant. How did you really do?" I stopped and looked at her. Her eyes held a complex desperation, like someone drowning and trying to grab onto anything. The contrast between her older daughter, who seemed to have done okay, and her younger daughter, who had completely bombed, was cruel, leaving her confused and lost. I didn't exaggerate or downplay it. I just stated calmly I did fine. I should score high enough for a top-tier university. A faint light flickered in Laura's eyes for a second, then quickly dimmed. She looked down and muttered, Oh, that's good, that's good." She repeated the words, whether to me or to herself, I couldn't tell. I knew that in her heart, no matter how well I did, it wouldn't immediately replace the years of ingrained bias or the sense of loss from Sarah's downfall. But this little piece of good news was like a stone tossed into stagnant water. It would eventually create ripples. I went back to my room and closed the door. The house quickly fell silent again. I didn't waste any time. I immediately found last year's college admission scores and university handbooks, and began to seriously estimate my score and research my options. This time, my future was firmly in my own hands. Every single college I chose would be far away from this city, far away from this home. A few days later, the official answer keys for the SATs were released. I locked myself in my room and rigorously graded my tests against the official answers. The result surprised even me. My score was over 60 points higher than I had estimated. Not only was it well above the cutoff for a major university, but it was also touching the admission lines for several top-tier schools. The advantage of being reborn, the calm state of mind, and the focus I had after freeing myself from all distractions had resulted in a quantum leap. I took a deep breath, suppressed my excitement, and carefully recorded my estimated score and a list of hand-picked colleges. From the living room, I could hear a fierce argument. "I don't care. I'm going to do a post-grad year. I'll definitely get in next year." It was Sarah's shrill cry. "Post-grad year? Where the hell am I supposed to get the money for that? You've already made me a laughingstock. You want to do it again?" George's roar made the door rattle. "Sarah, honey, let's not do that. You can go to a community college," Laura pleaded through her tears. "Community college? I won't go. It's all Chloe's fault. She's the one who ruined everything. If it weren't for her..." Smack. A sharp slap cut her off. It was followed by George's enraged bellow. "You dare mention her again. I'll kill you, you ungrateful brat. You couldn't pass, so you blame someone else. You jinx." The sounds of crying, cursing, and things being thrown devolved into chaos. I sat at my desk, my face impassive, and carefully folded the list of colleges I had written down. The storm outside had nothing to do with me anymore. My journey was toward the stars, and they deserved to rot in the miserable pit of resentment and torment they had dug for themselves. This was the first exam I had passed since my rebirth. The day to submit college applications arrived. The low pressure at home continued, but the dynamics had subtly shifted. George no longer yelled constantly. Instead, he would periodically scan me and Sarah with a dark, appraising gaze. Laura had become more cautious, especially when speaking to me, sometimes adopting a tone that was almost fawningly tentative. Sarah was completely deflated, like a wilted flower. She spent most of her time locked in her room. When she did come out, her eyes were vacant and venomous. She had stopped talking about retaking the year. A brutal beating from George, and his threat to get out if you mention it again had extinguished that idea. It seemed she had accepted her fate, or perhaps she was just biding her time. That morning, I took out the application form I had meticulously prepared, ready to go to the school for a final confirmation with my teacher before submitting it. The moment Laura saw the form, she scurried over, a smile plastered on her face. "Chloe honey, time to apply? Let Mom see, which great schools did you pick?" Her tone was filled with an unprecedented eagerness. George put down his newspaper and looked over as well. I didn't hide it. I just handed them the form. The list was filled with top-ranked universities, all out of state, with majors in popular fields or solid foundational sciences. Laura stared at the unfamiliar, impressive-sounding university names, her eyes a bit glazed over. She muttered to herself, They're all so far away." George glanced at it, his brow furrowing. In his usual critical tone, he said, "Why apply so far away? It's not convenient for a girl to be so far from home. There are good universities in state, too. Go to a local teacher's college or business school. It'll be easier for me to pull some strings and get you a job after graduation." See, even now, his first thoughts were of his control and his pathetic network of contacts, not what was best for me. Before I could speak, Laura suddenly tugged on George's arm, her voice strangely urgent. "Oh, don't say that. Our daughter did well. It's good for her to see the world. When Chloe is successful, we'll look good too, right?" She then turned to me, her smile even more eager. "Chloe, don't listen to your father. Apply wherever you want. Mom supports you." I scoffed internally. She didn't support me. She had just finally realized that her younger daughter was a lost cause, and that I, the older daughter she had always ignored, might be her new hope and a source of bragging rights for the rest of her life. She was desperate to grab onto this straw that had suddenly started to glitter. George was taken aback by Laura's uncharacteristic defiance. He gave her a suspicious look, then glanced back at the prestigious names on my application. Something seemed to click. He grunted and didn't object further, just muttering, "Do whatever you want. Just don't come crying back to me when you can't make it out there." I said nothing and took back the form. Just then, Sarah's door creaked open a crack. Her dark eyes were staring out from the gap, fixed on us, on the application form in my hand. Her gaze reminded me of a snake coiled in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I ignored her and left with the form. At school, Mr. Peterson reviewed my choices and nodded in satisfaction. "Good, the tiers are well balanced. These are all excellent schools and majors, and they match your estimated score. Chloe, I'm really happy for you. Submit it just like this. You have a very good chance." He paused and lowered his voice. "Your family, they didn't give you any more trouble, did they?" "No, they didn't. Thank you for your concern, Mr. Peterson," I said with a smile. After successfully submitting my application, the last weight was lifted from my shoulders. When I got home, everything was as usual. Sarah's door was still shut. However, that evening, when I went to take a shower, I carelessly left the draft of my application, which had the final list of colleges and their program codes in order, on the old table in the living room. When I came out of the bathroom, the paper was gone. My heart sank. My gaze immediately shot to Sarah's door. The light seeping from under it showed she was still awake. Laura was folding laundry on the balcony. George was watching TV. "Mom, did you see a piece of paper with a bunch of writing on it on the table?" I asked casually. "Huh. Didn't notice. Maybe it got thrown out with the trash?" Laura answered absently. George didn't even look up. I checked the trash can. It wasn't there. My heart turned to ice. I was almost certain who had taken it. What was she planning to do? Rip it up? Destroy it? Such a childish move would only infuriate me and have no real effect, since the application was already submitted online. I walked to Sarah's door and knocked. No response. "Sarah, did you take the draft I left in the living room?" I asked coldly. I heard some rustling inside, then Sarah's sleepy, irritated voice. "What draft? I'm sleepin'. Leave me alone." Her acting was terrible. I stood at the door, silent for a few seconds. I knew arguing would be pointless. She would never admit it. But I couldn't just let it go. I turned, and without any warning, walked directly to the old landline phone in the corner of the living room and unhesitatingly dialed 3 numbers. Hello 911? I'd like to report a crime. My voice was clear and calm, echoing like thunder in the quiet living room. What are you doing? George leaped up from the sofa, staring at me in shock. Laura was so frightened she ran in from the balcony, dropping a pile of clothes on the floor. Sarah's door was flung open. She was in her pajamas, her face showing no signs of sleepiness, only pure shock and panic. Are you crazy? She shrieked. I ignored them and continued speaking into the phone. Yes, officer. An important document of mine has been stolen from my home. This document is related to my college admission and my future. I suspect a family member has taken it with the intent to destroy or alter it. The address is... Chloe. What is this nonsense? George rushed over, trying to snatch the phone, his face livid. I sidestepped him, quickly finished giving the address, and then hung up. The house fell into a dead silence. Laura was trembling. You called the police, Chloe. Was that necessary? It was probably just a piece of scrap paper. Sarah was deathly pale, her fingers gripping the doorframe so tightly her knuckles turned white. I looked at them, my gaze finally landing on Sarah's face. My tone was terrifyingly calm. It was necessary. That's my future. Anyone who tries to touch it, I will fight them to the death. It's a good thing the police are coming. Didn't we install a security camera in here? We can just pull up the footage, and everything will be clear. I pointed to the dusty old camera in the corner of the living room, which was originally meant to deter burglars. In reality, that camera had been broken for years. But I was betting that they, especially the guilty as in Sarah, wouldn't dare call my bluff. Sure enough, when Sarah heard the word camera, her pupils contracted, and the last bit of color drained from her face. Less than 10 minutes later, the police were at our door. It was the same 2 officers from before. They recognized our family, and their expressions were a little strange. What happened? Who called? Before George and Laura could speak, I stepped forward and said clearly, Officer, it was me. A draft of my college application confirmation was taken from the living room. It contains my personal information and critical application details. I suspect it was taken by someone with ill intent. I want to file a report and have this investigated. George and Laura stood to the side, their faces white, their lips trembling. They couldn't say a word. They had never been so humiliated in their lives. The officer frowned, looking at my parents and the obviously distressed Sarah. Just then, Sarah suddenly rushed back into her room, then ran out with the crumpled piece of paper, shoving it into my hand. Her voice was thick with tears and sheer terror. Here, take your stupid paper back. Who wants it? I just picked it up to look at it. Do you really have to call the police? You scared me to death. Her psychological defenses had completely collapsed under the threat of the police actually showing up and the bluff about the camera. I took the paper and looked at the officer, my voice calm. Officer, the item has been found. However, the act of taking someone else's important document without permission did occur. I require an apology and a promise that this will not happen again. The officer nodded grimly and looked at Sarah and her parents. You people again. Last time it was false accusations, this time it's theft? How are you raising your children? College applications are a serious matter. This is not a game. George and Laura were so thoroughly berated they couldn't even lift their heads. They apologized profusely. The police gave Sarah a stern warning before they left. The moment the door closed, George raised his hand as if to strike again, but as he looked at my expressionless face, his hand fell limply to his side, turning into a sigh of utter exhaustion and defeat. The last shred of false peace in this house had been torn to pieces by my own hands. But I didn't care. I took the recovered draft, didn't give any of them a second glance, and went back to my room. I knew that from now on, in this house, no one would dare to touch my things, let alone my future. My battlefield was finally clear. After the police left, the air in the house seemed to congeal, so heavy it was hard to breathe. George didn't explode as he usually would. He just gave me a deeply complicated look, one that held lingering anger, disbelief, profound fatigue, and even a hint of fear. In the end, he said nothing, slumping back onto the sofa and lighting a cigarette. In the swirling smoke, his back seemed much more stooped. Laura was like a puppet with its strings cut. She looked at Sarah's closed door, then toward my room, lost and bewildered. Finally, she just started silently picking up the clothes she had dropped, her movements mechanical and numb. Sarah's room was dead silent. Not even a sob could be heard. After the extreme fear, perhaps what followed was an even deeper resentment and despair. I calmly returned to my room and locked the door. Everything outside was irrelevant. I knew that after this battle, I had drawn an invisible line in this family. They might still be biased and foolish, but at least now, they wouldn't dare to cross it. The following days passed in a strange tranquility. George and Laura stopped ordering me around. They even spoke to me with a certain caution. They would cook my share of the meals, and while they were far from warm, it was no longer the leftovers and cold rice of the past. Laura would even occasionally ask me in a dry tone, "Do you have enough money?" Sarah became a ghost in the house. She rarely left her room, and when she ate, it was only after we were finished. She lost weight rapidly, her face pale and her eyes vacant. When our gazes occasionally met, hers no longer held sharp hatred, but a dead, chilling numbness. I knew she hadn't given up. She had just buried all her venom deeper. I enjoyed the peace and quiet. Aside from reading, I spent most of my time planning my future. I looked up the process for student loans and work-study programs, and began to secretly pack my things, gathering my important documents and few personal belongings, just waiting for the acceptance letter to arrive. Days turned into weeks, and finally, the day the official scores were released arrived. I had borrowed a classmate's laptop, and was waiting in front of the screen. As I typed in my ID number, my heart couldn't help but race. The page refreshed, total score, 5. A score far above the cutoff for a top-tier university. High enough to give me my choice of any college I had applied to. It was even a few points higher than my own estimate. Even though I had expected it, a wave of immense joy and relief washed over me. I covered my mouth, my eyes growing hot. This time, I had truly, firmly seized my own destiny. Almost simultaneously, my phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson, his voice ecstatic. "Chloe, this is fantastic. 596. You're ranked 12th in the entire school. Even with a 0 on the English section because you were sick, you did incredibly well. It's just a shame about that 0. Otherwise your score would have been even higher. I knew you could do it. The universities you applied to are a sure thing. Congratulations." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice choked with emotion. After I hung up, I heard a commotion from the living room. Laura and George were clearly checking scores on their phones, and their shouts of disbelief and astonishment pierced through my door. How many?" 596. Chloe got a 596. That was Laura's voice, so shrill it cracked. "Is that real? Let me see." George's voice was filled with shock. Immediately, there was a loud banging on my door. Laura's voice was laced with an unprecedented excitement and sycophancy. Chloe, you got a 596. Oh my God. Did I see that right? Open the door, let me see." I calmly opened the door. Outside, Laura and George were squeezed together, their faces a mixture of ecstatic joy and something close to awe, as if they were truly seeing me, their daughter, for the first time. Good. George was so excited he could only repeat that one word, rubbing his hands together. He wanted to pat my shoulder but seemed to flinch back under my calm gaze, awkwardly retracting his hand. I knew my daughter had it in her. Much better than that. Laura was crying tears of joy and started to blurt out, but she stopped herself midway, realizing what she was about to say. She glanced awkwardly at Sarah's closed door. That door, at this moment, was like a silent tombstone, shutting out all the celebration and joy. The contrast was too stark. One score was a brilliant 596, the other, with a 0 in English, was a terrible sight. Not even high enough for the worst community college. Their joy, as a result, became even more inflated and more twisted. Soon, the phone started ringing off the hook with calls from relatives and friends. Laura and George answered, their voices booming, desperate to let the whole world know what a high score their older daughter had gotten, what a great university she was headed to. The pride and gloating in their voices practically overflowed from the receiver. They seemed to have completely forgotten that not long ago, they had been cheering on their other daughter's Harvard dream while scoffing at me. The realism of human nature was on full display. Amidst all the fake compliments and excitement, I remained perfectly calm. A few days later, a beautiful acceptance letter arrived as expected. It was from a top-tier university in the South, my first choice. When I signed for the package, Laura and George crowded around me as if witnessing a sacred event, repeatedly stroking the cover of the letter, their faces split into wide grins. Great, great, great. This is a great university. The name alone sounds impressive. George beamed. I'll go to the bank right now and get you money. Mom will pay for your tuition and living expenses. Laura said, eager to show her support, trying to make up for years of neglect. You don't have to, Mom, I refused coolly. I've already applied for student loans. They'll be enough to cover tuition and living expenses. The smiles on their faces froze. Loans? What loans? What will people think if they find out? It's not like the family doesn't have money. George immediately objected, his pride wounded. That's right, Chloe, the family will pay. You can't take out loans. Laura added hastily. I looked at them, my tone calm but unyielding. I can support myself. You should save the family's money for someone who needs it more. My words were like a cold needle, gently popping the bubble of their false enthusiasm. They were instantly silenced, their faces shifting between pale and flushed. They understood what I meant, and they understood my determination to draw a clear line between us. In the end, they didn't insist, just watched with complicated expressions as I put away the letter that symbolized my independence and my escape. That night, I heard Laura on the phone in the living room, her voice a low mix of pride and complaint. Yeah, she got in. A major tech university. Sigh, but the kid is so stubborn. Insists on taking out her own loans. Says she won't spend our money. What can you do? She's all grown up. Won't listen to her mother anymore. I leaned against my door and smiled silently. Whether I listened to her or not had long been out of her hands. The start of the semester drew closer. I began to pack in earnest. I had very few things, and a single suitcase held almost all my worldly possessions. The night before I left, the house was unusually quiet. Surprisingly, Sarah came out for dinner. She ate in silence, her head nearly buried in her bowl. George and Laura tried to liven up the atmosphere, making small talk and laughing, but it all sounded strained and awkward. After dinner, I went back to my room for a final check. There was a soft knock on the door. I opened it. Sarah was standing there. She looked up at me. For the first time in months, she spoke to me clearly, her voice hoarse and flat, but carrying the coldness of a viper. Chloe, do you think you've won? No matter how high you fly, you can't change the fact that you're cheap and unloved down to your bones. Just you wait. After she said her piece, she didn't wait for my response. She turned, went back to her room, and closed the door. I stood there, watching her disappear, feeling nothing. The curse of a loser was nothing but wind to me. The next morning at the crack of dawn I left. I didn't let anyone see me off. I dragged my suitcase and quietly opened the front door. The living room was empty. They weren't up. Maybe they didn't want to face the separation. Or maybe they just didn't know how. That was fine. I took one last look at this place that held so many painful and suffocating memories, felt not a shred of attachment, and quietly but firmly closed the door behind me. The morning light was just beginning to break. The cool air I breathed in tasted of freedom. I flagged down a taxi and headed for the train station. Through the window, the city was waking up, the streets filling with cars and people. My new life was beginning. This time, I was living only for myself. Life at the university was a world away from that suffocating house. It was a place of freedom, openness, and infinite possibilities. I devoured knowledge, joined clubs, and made friends from all over the country. Student loans and a work-study job gave me financial independence. Life was busy, but my heart was full and steady. I rarely called home, and they, in a kind of mutual understanding, faded from my life. Occasionally, Laura would call, her voice always cautious, asking if I had enough money or if my studies were tiring, followed by long, awkward silences. I would usually give brief answers. I have enough, it's not tiring, I'm fine, and say little else. George never called. Sarah was completely off the grid. That house became a vague, distant nightmare from a past life. I thought I would continue on this peaceful path until I had completely severed my ties to the past. But one ordinary afternoon during my sophomore year, I got a call from Laura. This time, her voice wasn't cautious. It was hoarse from crying, filled with a frantic, helpless panic. Chloe, what do I do? Your father's been arrested. My pen paused on my notebook for a second before I finished writing the last formula. My voice was flat. What happened? Tell me slowly. It was Sarah. It was that damn Sarah. Laura wailed into the phone, her words a jumbled mess. I don't know when, she got into a lot of debt. Loan sharks. These awful men came to the house. Your father got angry and started fighting with them. Someone called the police, and the police came and took your father and all of them away. They said it was for fighting, and it might be related to illegal lending. Oh, Chloe, what am I going to do? I don't know anyone. I listened quietly, my heart a placid lake. I almost wanted to laugh. Of course. Sarah would never stay quiet. With her twisted personality, after extreme suppression, she was bound to explode in an even more destructive way. I just hadn't expected she would drag George down with her. I'm outside the police station now. They won't let me in. Chloe, you know a lot of people. Can you think of something? Call your teachers? Your classmates? Your father can't go to jail. Laura's voice was filled with desperate dependence. She seemed to have forgotten how she had once treated the very daughter. She was now begging for help. I closed my notebook and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling, vibrant campus below. My tone was still level. Mom, I'm a student. I don't know anyone who can interfere with the legal system. Since the police are involved, let it go through the proper channels. Hire a lawyer if you need to, and cooperate with the investigation. A lawyer? Lawyers cost so much money. Where are we going to get that kind of money? That jinx spent it all. Laura shrieked. Chloe, do you have any money? Can you send some to help me out? If your father gets sentenced, this family is finished. There it was. It always came down to money. Mom, the money I have is just enough for my own tuition and living expenses. I don't have any extra. I refused directly, leaving no room for negotiation. Besides, I think the most important thing right now is to figure out exactly how much Sarah owes and to whom. Not to think about how to use money to bail someone out. My words were so calm they were almost cruel, like a bucket of ice water dousing Laura's last hope. She was stunned into silence on the other end, as if she couldn't believe I could be so cold. Then her sobs turned into wails of accusation. Chloe, how can you be so heartless? He's your father. Even if he wronged you in the past, you can't just watch him go down. How did you become so cruel? I listened quietly to her accusations. When she quieted down, I said slowly, Mom, it's not that I'm cruel, it's that I'm powerless. And I'm not the one who created this situation. You should be looking for the person who is truly responsible. The line went silent, leaving only the sound of suppressed sobs. I knew she couldn't find Sarah. That lucky star who had brought down the sky had probably disappeared during the chaos of the loan sharks and the police raid. Or perhaps she had orchestrated the whole thing. I have a class, so I have to go. If anything happens, wait for the police to contact you, I said. And before she could respond, I hung up. Putting down my phone, I felt no disturbance in my heart. If anything, there was a strange sense of calm, like a premonition that had been confirmed. Sarah's backlash was violent, but it was no longer aimed directly at me. She had chosen a more thorough, more destructive way to get revenge on the family that had once lifted her to the heavens, only to cast her aside like trash. And this time, the fire finally couldn't reach me. I took a deep breath, put the matter out of my mind, picked up my books, and headed to class. My path was forward, not back toward the smoldering ruins that were always destined to burn. Over the next few days, Laura called a few more times, crying about how George was being detained and would likely be sentenced, how the loan sharks were still harassing her, threatening to sell the house. Her voice grew more desperate with each call. I listened, occasionally offering useless but technically correct advice like report it to the police or contact the neighborhood committee, then ended the calls by saying I had to study. After that, her calls became less frequent. Until a month later, when I received a call from a distant aunt I barely knew. Her tone was full of sighs and complicated emotions. "Chloe, honey, you've heard about what happened with your family, right? Oh, it's a tragedy. Your mother, she couldn't handle the stress. She fainted a few days ago. They took her to the hospital and said it was a brain hemorrhage. And she didn't make it. She passed away yesterday. As for your father, I heard his case is about to be sentenced. He's probably going to be in there for 3 to 5 years. And Sarah, there's been no news of her at all. No one knows if she's dead or alive. It sounds like the loan sharks have their eyes on the house, so that's probably gone too. Chloe, you're all alone out there now. You have to take care of yourself. What a mess." I held the phone, listening to my aunt's sighs, and was silent for a long time. Finally, I just whispered, "Thank you for telling me, Auntie. I understand." After hanging up, I walked out onto my dorm room balcony. The sun was shining brightly, and I could hear the faint sound of my classmates laughing below. I looked out at the horizon. I felt no sadness, no joy, only a vast, settled peace. The cage and quagmire that had been my home had finally, in the midst of Sarah's mad self-destruction, completely disintegrated and vanished. All the love and hate, the favoritism and schemes, had in that moment scattered to the wind. I turned around. On my desk, my future was clean, clear, and completely, utterly my own.